Hey friends, it's Pete Dominick, and this is episode 21 of the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. Today's question, have you ever built a community of any kind? Welcome to the classroom of life that is Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where every show we do our best to fight apathy and learn together from expert guests about the issues and ideas that matter to you, your family, your community, country, and planet. Trying to start with a question now. Have you ever built a community of any kind? Maybe you built an online community. I did that. I built the Stand Up with Pete Garden Club on Facebook. It's fun. Maybe you built a community at your school or in your town. Well, Steve Nygren built a whole town. That's right. It's called Serenbe. It's just 30 minutes outside of Atlanta. And they combined the words serenity and being. They had a vision that they've now in many ways realized that's built around 4 pillars: art, agriculture, health, and education. I've been to Serenbe 3 times. You got to Google this place. Steve Nygren, who is my guest on today's podcast, is a fascinating man in his early 70s who has more energy than most of us have in our 30s and 40s. He has this joie de vivre, if you will, like I've never, ever been around. I met Steve in 2017 at the Children and Nature Network International Conference in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I was the MC and host of their daily panels that they had there. And that was a life-changing experience for me for many reasons. But meeting Steve, who's in the president organization, was probably the best thing to come out of it. Because this guy wouldn't leave me alone. He wouldn't stop inviting me to bring my family to Serenbe. And they have their own podcast, by the way. It's called Serenbe Stories, where Steve Nygren shares his own story of how an afternoon drive changed his family's life. He chose to leave the city, his job, his big house, and all that Atlanta had to offer to instead wrap his arms around his family and move full-time to the country. Serenbe Stories is available everywhere you find podcasts. The first season is live and available to binge listen, and I am a guest on an upcoming season, and I'm really looking forward to that because I should say I went down to Serenbe to meet with Steve Nygren. I also taped my podcast with Rich Louv there and met with a whole bunch of other people. Walking with Walsh, Jennifer Walsh. That's going to be coming out soon. Really, really excited about that. Also coming up on today's episode, you can hear my conversation with Trump supporter, MAGA warrior, a guy I just literally got in an argument with on Twitter named Brian. I'm just having random conversations with people now. And of course, I asked my permission if I could interview him and tape it and share it. He gave that to me, and that's coming up. And it's really interesting, I think, right after my conversation with Steve Nygren. Don't forget to support us on Patreon. That's the only way I can continue to host this podcast and interview these fascinating people. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Here now, my conversation with Steve Nygren.
So it's always really exciting, and I'm always very happy when I am talking to you, Steve Nygren. So happy to be in your presence whenever I am. I feel like your time is so valuable because so many people want to be around you. I'm happy I get some of it again.
Well, that's a reflection exactly of how I feel when I'm around you. And I watch all the people just excited to see you, hear your voice, hear what you have to say, your perspective on what's happening.
You and I met in a few years ago in Vancouver at the Children and Nature Network, and you came up to me and invited me to come down here. Were you the president of that organization at the time?
I was at the time, exactly.
And you invited me to come to this place, and at first I was like, who is this guy? Where is this place? Long story short, I came. You told me to bring my wife and my daughters. You made me an artist in residence, which was so prestigious sounding for me, a comedian and radio guy. And we had a magical, magical week here. I am forever in your debt for the time that we had then. And when we came a second time, this is my 3rd time being here, although without the kids. Let's talk about this place, Serenbe. Let's talk about you. You were a very successful restaurant owner.
That's correct.
You were in the food industry for a long time.
Hospitality.
Hospitality is what
Yeah.
how
70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah. How did you get into that?
I started working for Stouffer's Food Corporation when I was at the University of Colorado.
Stouffer's, the French bread pizza people.
Yeah, well, they were fine. They were fine dining. I mean, they really brought dining. Before.
Oh, it was before they had the prepared food.
Oh, before frozen foods. They in the 20s and 30s were really one of the leaders throughout New York, Chicago. All of your old
restaurants?
Cities, they were restaurants.
It was a family that owned different restaurants?
It was a family.
It was Stouffer's?
There was two brothers. The family name was Stouffer's. Uh-huh. And they started with these basic restaurants. And then sometime, I guess, in the 60s, late 60s, they started top of. I mean, New York had top of the sixes, for instance. They were top of all the buildings. This is when...
the restaurants were at the top of the building. I see what you're saying. Right,
when urban America was building all the skyscrapers. Mm-hmm. And they would go into the tallest building being built and put a restaurant on top of it.
Smart.
It was kind of the big thing.
Great place to eat.
Yeah, and so they just opened top of the Rockies in downtown Denver. And so I started working down there when I was at the University of Colorado.
You grew up in Colorado?
I grew up in Colorado.
Where
Family's been on the plains right outside of Boulder since 1860.
You're from like a farming family?
Farming family.
What did they farm? What did they farm?
We had cattle, sugar beets, barley for Coors.
And what? Oh yeah. There you go. Coors beer has been there forever. Oh, yeah. When you were little, Steve Nygren. Did anybody call you Stevie? When you were little Stevie Nygren, what was your childhood like?
Well, I was an only child with an alcoholic father living on a farm, but there was that network of the big family. And one time when my dad lost his farm, we moved into the house with my mother's parents. And still living in the house was my grandfather's mother, who had built the house.
Wow.
Like in 1900. And then my grandmother's father had a stroke, and so they'd moved them in. So I really understood generational living on a major scale because I was living 4 generations in one house.
What was the space like?
Well, it seemed huge at the time, and you go back now, and it's not that not that great. It was a great farm, Colorado farmhouse. But,
did you work on the farm?
Oh, absolutely. I worked the entire time, and so that's why I was delighted when some friends that have a resort up in the mountains of Colorado said, "Hey, if you don't want to go back to the farm this year, we can get you a job out there." And oh my God, I don't have to go back to the farm this year.
Why? Because it was brutal work. It was
you had
just
to work hard, and I didn't get along with my dad, and so I did not want. Yeah, it's hard work.
How did your dad's alcoholism and your relationship with him shape you? Because you're such a great dad and friend and father. And how did that relationship shape you?
Well, I clearly, when I had my own children, I understood the kind of father I wanted to be. It was the father I never had. But I had a strong mother who made sure that I understood that I could do anything I wanted to and not to let my existing circumstances hamper me. And so she gave me that real foundation, plus the extended family. My great-grandmother was one of my real buddies, and I was 14 when she died. And so, being this elder with great wisdom.
She imparted wisdom upon you, like absolutely. She would tell you things?
Absolutely. And just very basic, great things. I mean, if you, at dinner last night, you noticed I had hot water. Well, that comes from her. She always drank hot water. Just her eating habits were very much like we think of today as a healthy eating habit. And her outlook, she was this, great Swedish woman who came from Sweden when she was 3 years old with her parents when they immigrated.
That's interesting because what I know of about Scandinavia, and I don't know if it was always this way, but that there's a lot of gender equity. So was she like a strong woman and equal in kind of her marriage? Was she not like a... I don't know, in any way seen as inferior? I mean, because was there that kind of strength in her? Or? She
was clearly the strong woman. She was the matriarch, stood tall, was never sick until the last 24 hours of her life.
Is that right?
And with mind and body.
So, what do you attribute that to? Her health?
Well, I think it was good living and a good attitude. I mean, she always had a good attitude. You never heard her complain about anything. And my great-granddad, he was very successful, involved in not only the farming, but banking and mining. And he lost everything in the Depression. And 2 years after the Depression hit, he had a heart attack and died.
Oh, wow.
Which is why then my mother was raised in this house that then I moved into. So there was this really generational understanding. And I remember in my 20s when I went to a therapist to talk about my dad and the relationship and some of that healing, and I started talking about the relationships. He said, you have one of the most healthy understanding of family. And as we talked about it, we realized that it was because I lived in a house with two great grandmothers from different sides who were telling me what was wrong with my grandparents or my parents. So there was always this very realistic attitude about adulthood that people weren't these perfect people. And so I never had parents on pedestals. I always saw them through a realistic lens of human beings that are flawed. And so that really gave me a great understanding also in forgiveness and understanding. And that idea of who we are is generational effect on us, and probably goes back to 7 generations. And I could easily see those 6 generations from the stories that were being told to me.
You have such a powerful presence. I think anybody that knows you and spends time with you grows to like you very quickly, wants to be around you, admires you, wants to learn from you. Kind of a spirituality and energy that you have. And I wonder, I've never asked you this or talked with you about it. Did religion ever play any role in your life as a child? Does it now? Like kind of an organized traditional religion?
Well,
it
depends on what you're referring to as religion.
Okay.
I was raised in the country Methodist church, but because this was a rural church just outside of Denver, I mean, we are 30 miles outside of Denver. Mm-hmm. So, and the Methodist theology school of Iliff was at the University of Denver. And so we always had the people in their final training to go into their ministry. So we always had these young, progressive thought leaders. So it was more of a current attitude about religion that was there in the discussions and so forth. But I was very involved in youth leadership. I was went to the church camp every summer, was president of the church camp my senior year in high school, was very involved. I remember going off then to the University of Colorado, and when I was asked to come back to preach as a student sermon, I forget what the day was where they celebrated the youth, and I had been at the university several months, and all of a sudden these new ideas, and I was able to see some of the hypocrisy that I had witnessed growing up. And so I decided to just talk to everybody about it.
How'd that go over?
Didn't go over well with most other people, But that was my first, the first time that I started really questioning organized religion. And
college.
In college. And some of the teachings in total acceptance and forgiveness and I saw that there was a lot of judgment and divisiveness. And as I went on into my life, I really looked at so many religions speak as control for whatever their power base is. And I really question what that's about. And many times here at Serenbe, people ask me, if we're going to build a chapel. And I often say, I don't want us to lose our religion.
Oh, it's a great answer.
Because
it's a great answer.
Once we start dealing with the brick and mortar, we start dealing with power and controls, and it really changes things. And the people here have great spirit and great religion, and they meet in various ways, but it's not around a bricks and mortar kind of cathedral.
Well, that's what it's a perfect. The thing that I'm always very critical of organized religion, but the one thing I can't deny about it is that it does create a community. And so people argue, well, if you're not part of a church, part of a religion, then you're missing out on a community. But you created this community to have people interacting with each other. And everywhere you go here at Serenbe, people say hello and people are constantly connecting. You did that by design. And I wonder, you know, your home and your office is lined with books. Who was your inspiration for that? Or was there, an academic thought behind connecting people, or was it just your experience in life? Because the truth is, you don't have to have a church, a house of worship to have community, but you do have to live a certain way in a certain style, or you're not really going to be connecting with people in space.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing religion brings. If you're moving into a new community, that's where you can find that.
Yeah, if you don't know anybody, you just go to the church, and now you instantly have a...
And so we certainly did that. When the kids were very young, before we moved to the country, we were very involved in the Episcopal Church. And I loved it, and I loved the ceremony of it and the community of it. And so there's a lot of good things to be said about some of our organized religion, but when it gets to control or judging things outside of the community, then that's where I start having troubles. I grew up in a community, in the Swedish community, the church. We were part of the Grange, which is a farm organization, and that's about family and community. And so that just is part of what life should be. Now, being a hospitality person, that comes from a different attitude. It's making people comfortable and taking care of people. And also having restaurants, you deal with the extremes of society. You'll have someone you maybe brought in off the street that has whatever problems that has put them onto the street, and that's your dishwasher for the night. And you might have some of your most influential politicians or leaders in a community out in the dining room.
Yeah, but hold on a second. I mean, that's your style. Are you saying that the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry looks to help vulnerable people? You've always looked to help vulnerable people and help lift them up and give them an opportunity, give them a job. Here at Serenbe, you do that. And of course, I know that you did that with your restaurants, but I'm not sure that's the norm.
I know.
Most people don't want...
In the hospitality industry, what you operate between the extremes of society in a very short period of time through a meal period. Because chances are, wherever that dishwasher came from, that is at one end of the society and a minimum wage starting out. And then you have very influential people sitting in your dining room. And so you're fluctuating. So it's a great place to how to learn to deal with people, and you're dealing with various personalities. I mean, if you see a real personality, deal with someone who's either hungry or trying to influence their guests and show, how important they are. And so it's a great training ground for psychology and humanity as being in the restaurant business. You
went from working with the Stouffer family. I mean, when did you open your own first restaurant?
So I was with Stouffer's for 7 years, and then I was part of their opening hotel team. And they moved me to St. Louis. We opened that hotel. They moved me to Atlanta. And I fell in love with Atlanta. I arrived here in 1969. This was... at just the time that Atlanta had become 1 million people. The city was on fire with energy and excitement. And I loved it. And I loved the people here. And so then Stouffer sent me to home office in Cleveland for a couple of years. But I managed to then get myself back to Atlanta. And once we opened that hotel in October of 1972, I left that December then to open my first restaurant, because I realized I didn't want to keep moving. I wanted to put down roots, and this was a very exciting place to do that.
What was that restaurant?
Restaurant was called The Pleasant Peasant. It was in Midtown Atlanta, and Midtown Atlanta had been a great, one of those neighborhoods in 1900. It was just on the edge of Atlanta, just a mile from downtown Atlanta, but that was kind of the outskirts in 1900 in Atlanta. And this was built as Vic's Delicatessen. It was a Jewish delicatessen, and operated for several decades. And then in the white flight of the 60s, and then the hippies moved in. And so by the early 70s, it was a lot of boarded up buildings and not much going on. This space had been a continuous restaurant for the last several years. In fact, 5 restaurants in 5 years. So it was really run down.
It's a bad luck property.
It was a mess. But it was on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, and everyone knew where that was. And the rent was $400. And
$400 for a month to rent this commercial space as a restaurant?
That's right.
Wow.
I could afford that. And we bought all of their kitchen equipment that was kind of run down for all of $12,000. So we spent 6 weeks, put a keg of beer in the middle of the dining room, invited all of our friends that knew anything about plumbing and carpentry and electricity, and even a few said they did but didn't. So, but we
crowdsourced the build out.
Crowdsourced the building back in 1972, and we opened that in February of '73.
When you say we,
I had 3 partners. Mm-hmm. Now, I was still in my 20s, and so this was the idealism of the 20s. And so this all really came out of a drunken night that we all decided we should quit our jobs and open a restaurant.
Oh, wow. But,
what a risk. In the sobriety of the next day, I thought it was a good idea.
You still did.
And so I moved forward with the idea, and I announced to everyone that I had secured a lease and a bank loan. They go, whoa, what? And so one by one, they all quit their jobs to join me. And so there were 4 of us, 2 women and two men.
Oh, really?
And then within a very short time, the pressure of actually doing it, and they were all executives. So we'd all left executive jobs. And the 2 women were friends of mine at Stouffer's. One was the food and beverage director of the hotel, and one was the banquet director of the hotel. And we'd all become great bonding friends in St. Louis, and then moved to Atlanta within a few months of each other, and we all went in and quit the same day.
Oh, wow!
And then another friend was with Neiman Marcus and personnel, and decided to join us.
So you opened that first restaurant with those partners, and then what comes next?
And then within 3 months, the one partner she couldn't handle not being executive and had some real problems, so she left within 3 months. Mm-hmm. And the other was a workaholic. She ran the kitchen, and she had mononucleosis and very sick. And so she said, I can't do this. And so there was 2 of us, and the 2 of us built the company for most of the year. And then years later, when we had a opportunity to sell part of it, my original partner that I had worked with, he left. We had a junior partner that was with me at that point, and then we grew it into the final 36 restaurants that I sold when I decided to step off the treadmill.
36 restaurants when you decided to just get rid of it, cash it in and take your 3 daughters at that point in 1994?
That's correct.
To this place that we are at now, where you had a farmhouse. You had bought an old farmhouse. And I mean, tell me about how you get there. You're running, you built from 1973 to 1994, 36 restaurants. Were they all the same?
There were 2 basic concepts. One was mix, which was casual. We introduced the things like cookies and cheesecakes and great desserts, but it was, fresh food, and the other was a table service. We brought to Atlanta what you would think of as a New York neighborhood restaurant with reasonable prices, no reservations, and fresh food back in the 70s, which was not available in the 70s or towns like this.
Before we get here to Serenbe and your family, when you sold all the restaurants, I've talked to you before about your relationship with your employees and your ideas about labor, but you've talked to me and enlightened me about how kind of progressive you were even back then. This is a very diverse city. Even back then, there were a lot of gay people. There were obviously a lot of black folks down here in Atlanta. What was your view on, you're a white guy in the 70s from the Midwest. I mean, why were you so open-minded in terms of having all different types of people work for you in the South in the early 70s? How did you get there?
Well, looking back on it, I probably have a better perspective of the different types. When I was in the middle of hiring, I just was interested in hiring the best person. And I really did not have a lens as to whether what color skin they had or what their sexual orientation was or what sex they had.
That didn't come into play?
Looking back, I don't think it was, because I didn't do this because it was socially correct. I did it because sitting in front of me was the best person I thought I could hire. And, suddenly then, as you look back and it became obvious, we this is the early 70s, and people were very conscious if you were giving blacks or people of color equal opportunity. And so there was a lot of focus on that and tests on that. But looking back...
Conscious that you should or against it?
No, conscious that you should. And
in Atlanta.
And people were sensitive. So, I didn't think about it much, but I realized there were people testing corporations because we had about 3 applicants that we had hired that were just perfect. I was excited for them to report to work, and they never showed up. And it was a couple of years later that someone shared with me that they were sending that group of really talented people, and there were about a dozen into various corporations. And if they got turned down, then that was a basis that you were not offering equal opportunity. I found that out later. But no one was thinking about equality for women or gays. And so we created a place where women had equal opportunity and equal pay.
Why?
Because it was just the right thing to do. I mean,
I didn't think about the profitable thing to do?
Well, I didn't think about it. Here's a person, we're going to promote her to this job. This is the salary at that job
but that wasn't
level.
the way of thinking of people your age at that time in this region, much less anywhere else.
It never dawned on me that it wasn't.
Why? Well, what made you different? What made you more open-minded to that?
Probably that 94-year-old great-grandmother who...
Getting back to the beginning, yeah.
If I were to look at what it was just that attitude. I didn't judge that this was, if I was going to pay this person, if we had an amount that we were going to pay a person, you paid whoever.
Okay, so we understand race, we understand gender, but sexuality, 70s and 80s and the AIDS epidemic and homosexuality, that was not very welcome. People were terrified even to be around gay people during the AIDS epidemic, much less before it, just because they were gay. And God forbid.
Well, this precedes the AIDS epidemic. And so we realized, all of a sudden here when we were analyzing, wow, we have a lot of our really great people are gay because they found it was comfortable and they could be who they were, and we weren't judgmental, and we were cutting edge. We were fun. We were the place where all the cool people came. So in the 70s, it was kind of, you were avant-garde if you had these openly gay people working for you.
Oh,
it wasn't a detriment. No,
especially in the restaurant industry in the city.
Oh, in the city. And this was the cool New York kind of place. So if you were, in this New York place and there were these, cute...
It wasn't a hindrance.
Cute guys serving you. Hey, this was cool.
Really? People weren't uncomfortable with it, like the customers.
Oh, not at all.
It didn't matter that there's a gay guy serving me.
But now one of the frights, and the reason I initially sold part of the company, is all of a sudden the AIDS epidemic, and it wasn't even called AIDS yet, this plague was hitting, and it seemed to be hitting gay community and the African American community. And
you didn't know what it was, though.
None of us knew what it was.
You just saw people getting sick?
And there was kind of whispers, about, wow, can it be casual? And in fact, I remember there was some article somewhere that beauty salons and restaurants were going to be in a problem if you found out that casual contact was spreading whatever this plague was.
Sure, because you could get it.
And so for I had been open, I forget how many restaurants I had at that point, 10, 12. And, I was on boards, I was doing things, I was invincible. There was nothing that I saw that I didn't think I could tackle. And suddenly this was the first thing in the horizon, that if there was a headline, true or not, that this plague could be contacted by casual contact, I would be bankrupt overnight. Because we had all these great, cool, gay people that we were known. So that was really one of the first reasons that I sold part of the company. Initially, it was just a part of it. Because I realized with 3 small children, I needed diversity. And
in terms of your income?
Yeah, my entire being was tied up in this restaurant. And the loans to and my total income was this. So that was the first thing. In those days, too, we were the first to battle with the insurance companies because we were the first to be turning in claims. And the insurance company decided, because of our profile, that they would remove our insurance.
Healthcare.
And so we were at the front
Because
end
all these people
battling
on your policy were
that and
getting
how
sick.
we could figure out how to do that. So we've been at the forefront of a lot of these social issues. Unintended, you do the right thing here, and and I didn't do it because I thought it was the right thing. It was just the smart thing to do. To have talented people, why am I caring what they're all these other things are?
That's always one of the most fascinating things I think about you and this business and the AIDS epidemic. I mean, you told me that story before, and so I was hoping to lead you to it today. I'm glad that you just shared that, because what a fascinating time that must have been. What a terrifying time that must have been.
Absolutely.
Did you lose friends?
Oh, of course, and employees, and the unknown period was one of the most
Can't imagine.
frightening, because you didn't. What is it? Where is it?
Right. Right. That must have been absolutely terrifying.
And to have a workforce that had a number of recognized gay people, we were at that forefront.
Right. So you, getting back to where we were earlier, when you sold all these restaurants, 36 restaurants, you move out here to where we are now, Serenbe, and why did you do that? You always talk about, you decided to get off that treadmill. What was the catalyst for that?
Well, initially, we bought the farm as a weekend getaway, and it was just a spontaneous afternoon drive to show the kids animals at a farm that was for sale in the country.
About half an hour away from downtown Atlanta.
That's right, with no intentions of buying anything. I was curious if there was really open land that close, and when you have kids that are 3, 5, and 7, you're looking for fun things to do. Mm-hmm. And of course, when I arrived, they had the Shetland pony saddled, and we bought the farm that afternoon. Mm-hmm. So we could. It pleased the 4 females in my life, and so why not? And I'd imagine that we'd come out a couple Saturdays a month and get a Shetland pony, because that's, the kids thought that was cool. And my wife fixed the shack in the back. We rented the main historic house out because we didn't need another big house. And so she fixed that shack in case we ever wanted to spend the night. And to my amazement, it's where the family wanted to spend every weekend night, every vacation. And we had a great house in the city with the media room, the pool, all the trappings that money could buy. And yet they wanted to come to the shack where we had no toys except a puzzle for rainy days. And we squeezed into this little 2-bedroom shack. And doing that every weekend was a value shift for me. What's really important in life? I often think about how people reevaluated their lives after 9/11, and it lasted about 48 hours.
Yeah.
Well, for me, that was a slow drip reevaluation of what was important. And one Monday morning, several things had built up. I had an opportunity to sell the balance of my company. We'd had some great office on our house in Ansley Park, right in the center of the city. Through some of the political campaigns, my candidate didn't win. And so I was kind of, wondering, if there was any hope, if you will. And so one Monday morning, as we'd had a great weekend and I was driving back into the smog that I could physically see, I decided that smog was representing much more than just the climate. And I decided to sell everything. And as I refer to it, it's like stepping off the treadmill. And so we came out here, restored the old house, put in the garden, put in the pool, put in some of the things we missed. And you see pictures of me in those days. I have hair down to my shoulders.
And when did you decide, what changed that made you want to create the community that this is now? Was there a catalyst? Was there an experience? Was there a person that said, well, I could create a community here?
Well, in my 7th year of retirement, so life was great.
What did you do during those 7 years?
We traveled. I took afternoon naps when the kids were at school, put in the garden, cut some trails, bought a couple pieces of the touch land. We put the old historic farm back together.
You spent all of your time with your kids. You were with your kids at that young age.
All the time.
I mean,
there they were, 6, 8, and 10. And so then for those 7 years, I was very present, and it's one of the best decisions. And to watch them connecting with nature. We've just been talking to Richard Louv, and we moved out here in '94. He published that book in 2005.
Last Child in the Woods.
Last Child in the Woods, and it was the first time that I could explain to friends. They all thought I was crazy, but Richard,
all your big city friends,
all my big city friends, big city friends with kids, people that were going to the private school we were at, and Rich's book really gave voice to what I intuitively understood in the importance of connecting children to nature.
Right.
And anyone who meets our kids today can see they're very self-assured, and I believe a big part of that is that connection to nature, because
I know all of your daughters, and they are, if one word to describe them all, it'd be confidence.
Yes,
confidence in their body, in their life, in their choices, in their relationships. They really exude that, and I've often wondered, wow, how did those girls become those women? And I've asked you that.
That's right.
And you're giving me the answer now. It's just something to do with their connecting to their natural surrounding.
Well, we had been down here about 6 months. And so I've got, kids a little older than 6, 8, and 10. They were, and so I said, well, you're happy we moved down here, because we had a, great life in the city, and,
sure.
Everything very convenient and what have you, and lots of trappings. And I expected to say, oh yeah, because now we have a horse and we have a bunny, and friends had given each one of them a goat to, to take care of. And so I was expecting all those trappings, and they kind of looked at each other, and the 10-year-old Garni, she says, the freedom. And I said, the freedom? I mean, as a father, it was like a stab in the chest. What do you mean? She said, we had a big house in the city with a big fenced yard. But she says, we always knew you were looking out the windows, checking on us. And we could never ride our bicycle on the street without an adult. And we moved here and we're free. And that just touched me in a very
because that
serious
freedom
way.
engenders risk-taking, choice-making, for better or for worse, and not having to be overseen by an adult, and that creates the confidence that we're talking about?
All those things. No, number one, it touched me because I did not realize I was that uptight when we were in the city, or what's more, that they were aware of it.
Right.
And so that was a opening.
Well, because when you're always watching your kids, and when you're that uptight about them and worried about them, then they naturally become concerned about what you're worried about and become scared, maybe to take risks, and all of that is the antithesis to freedom.
That's exactly it. You're putting the exact words to it.
Right.
And so that's why you see the confidence you do, because they came out and they were not afraid anymore. And it was a lot how we felt as parents. We weren't afraid. Now, when I think back and hear some of the things they did out in the woods, there were dangers there. It wasn't like this was totally safe. So
we played BB gun wars.
Yeah.
I mean, growing up, we did all kinds. We jumped off all kinds of things, climbed all kinds of trees, and took risks, got injured.
Absolutely. So they had real consequences when they explored and did some of these things and had to deal with it. But
so when did you, or what created this idea to build this community that we now are in?
So here we are in paradise, and I was totally happy with retirement. There wasn't anything that I was looking to change, and we had bought a couple pieces just to put the old farm together. And then in 1999, there was a couple developments that were kind of at the edge of Palmetto, which is a little town just 4 miles from us. Forest we'd been driving through to get to the highway had been torn down to put houses in. And it was like, oh, wow,
That was paradise.
Yeah. And then my daughter and I were jogging one morning along what was then our property line, and the bulldozer was clearing the trees in the property next to us. And I ran out and stopped the bulldozer and said, what are you doing? And he said, we've just been hired to clear the trees. I guess they're putting houses here. That's what always happens. And so that was my moment of reckoning. I ran back to call the owner, a retired doctor who lived a couple counties over, and he turns out he was in Europe. And so he didn't return for 5 weeks. And in that 5 weeks that I was trying to figure out what was going on, I had another 600 acres under contract. This whole idea of, I don't want you to, destroy my backyard, and I'll just buy enough so you can't.
But did you buy it with the idea that you would develop it?
No, I just bought it to
buy
protect myself at that point. I was just reactionary. I was afraid, and that all those things I had left was going to come out here. And I'd seen this in Colorado. Where I grew up was now suburban. We opened our third restaurant in Roswell, which is the north end of Atlanta. And I drove through 4 miles of country and to get to the little town of Roswell. And now you can't tell where one town ends and the other ends. So I've seen this happen, and I saw how fast it was. And so that was the panic I was under. And the first response is, I'll just buy it. I'll just buy and protect it. And the retired doctor returned. I found he had sold it to someone to put in a little pasture airstrip, someone down the road. And so the immediate threat was over, but it was my wake-up call. And I also realized that 900 acres does not protect you in the path of urban sprawl. You'd have an island of preservation. We see that in a lot of metropolitan areas where people have tried to fight, and eventually you give in because...
So let me guess. You said, well, it's inevitable that it will be developed, so let me develop it in the way that in my vision.
And that was the next spot. We'll do a model in my vision so everybody will catch on. And a visit with George and Vicki Rainey outside Chicago that had tried doing the same thing. They were about 3 years ahead of us with Prairie Crossing. And we found from them the heartache in that people weren't following their vision. They were just building the same old thing next to them to take advantage of their preserved space. And so that's when I realized I wasn't thinking big enough. And I spent the next 2 years bringing 500 landowners together, both pro-preservationists and pro-preservation and pro-development people. And so we brought them together for a common conversation of what do we all want? How do we want to take control of our own land? How can we maximize the value and yet save a majority of it? And we really looked at the countryside of England. During my retirement, we traveled to England a lot because we had a dear friend who lived in the countryside. Learned a lot about the English land laws, the common footpaths, the little neighborhood pub and grocer, and the sense of community that had existed there that reminded me of what my community had been like in Colorado in the 40s and 50s. And so that was a land use model because after World War II, they put good land laws in. The island was only so big and they couldn't indulge in the urban sprawl that the rest of the world was getting ready to take in. Right. But it was quite a trick bringing English land law to a property rights southern state. So we worked with universities, both University of Georgia and Texas A&M, and we presented land plans, brought to Georgia transfer development rights, which is a tool that can really transfer value and development rights, and came up with a model that we can actually save 70% of this land by putting 20% more housing per square mile than the urban sprawl. And then it became my responsibility to demonstrate it on my land that these principles under these zoning laws could work.
How long did it take you to get people to buy in and actually buy homes here? What was the biggest challenges and why did you succeed? How did you succeed? It's a big bet.
It was a big bet, and it took 2 years to bring the community together and to change the zoning laws. So I thought I was, Mr. Powerful. Man, I've got, we had editorials. This is incredible. We had 80% support. The 20% that didn't support us, didn't oppose us. They just stayed home
in the community.
So these were. Yeah, and these were pro-development, land speculators to people that didn't want a thing done. So we had brought them together for a common vision. So I thought I was just invincible. This was one of the greatest ideas. We were getting praise from everywhere. And then, of course, we spent the next year changing laws that allowed us to do a lot of this. And so finally, when we had the zoning in place, we had the laws changed that we needed. Okay, now I'm going to bring a bunch of investors in because I'm never going to go in debt again after what I had, survived through the restaurant industry. Right. And I thought I had the greatest idea. Now I find out how hard some of these folks laughed on their way back to Atlanta. Here I thought I was going to do this community out in the middle of the woods in Georgia. No way. And at some point during this whole thing, I had stepped through the threshold of passion because in understanding what we wanted to do, I realized how broken our development patterns were and the poor effects we were having on people's health, on our environment. And it became so clear to me, and I couldn't understand why no one was doing it. And I constantly analyzed, am I that naive or am I that visionary? What, and I didn't know. But somewhere I had stepped through that passion that I had to do it. I had to prove this. Luckily, I had believed in Midtown Atlanta, where that first restaurant was, and I bought property there in the 70s when no one was really paying attention. Today, Midtown Atlanta is some of the hottest real estate because we changed the zoning there in the 80s to make it a walkable community, and it's a grid, and it's really a cool place today. And so I started selling and leveraging that property, and that's how we've built Serenbe, basically.
You financed it.
That's right. Because no one was going to let us do it, and so at this point I decided, well,
what was their biggest complaint as to why they didn't want to invest?
We're not in the obvious path of Atlanta's development. Most of the development went north, and so the south was not the part where people were going. This wasn't the obvious play.
We're southwest of Atlanta here.
Southwest of Atlanta. We're sitting out here in the woods where there were no roads, there was no infrastructure, there was nothing here.
Who wants to live near nothing?
That's right. And so this was the idea that there was nothing here.
Right. Got it.
And so it just seemed like a crazy idea.
I could talk to you about this development step by step for forever, but you've got places to be and people to talk to. So let me just ask you to describe here in 2019 what Serenbe is, because there's these separate communities within the community that have names, that have themes, that have influences with, as you mentioned earlier, the English architecture. There's Scandinavian influences. Every home is very unique and different, yet there are obviously similarities in terms of they mostly have porches in front. There's not really many lawns. They're all connected by trails. There's lakes, there's streams. And obviously there's also, it's not obvious to people listening, but it's all centered around food and nature and art. Art plays a huge role. So take it from here, Steve Nygren, and tell us what Serenbe is here in 2019 and why do I love it so much?
Well, one of our first influences was, number one, we're going to preserve the land because I was a preservationist over being a developer. A developer was the goal to do that. And that was to do that, you put a lot of density in the small areas, the 30%. So we put all the density. That brings you to a dense little village like you see in England or like you saw in America in the 1800s. Walkable communities, they were dense. They had front porches pulled close to the street. And so we really looked and analyzed a lot of these things. How did we build and develop 100 years ago? The other thing I was very conscious of is we wanted to build a town and not a development. And there's a very distinct difference, in some subtle, some not so subtle, on the difference of that. So we really focused there. So once we had that village idea and the preservation, and we wanted to have clusters with nature in between it. And so we have the omegas, these big horseshoes. This allows for every front door to open on the street with porches, and the back to open to nature, whether it's a farm, a forest, a pasture, or a wildflower meadow. We often say that Serenbe is built for the split personality within each of us or within a relationship.
That's interesting.
And generally, you have to choose to be at nature or a community, and you have to drive to the other. But here, you simply decide which door you're going to go out, your front door or your back door, and you have both. Community out the front door and nature out the back door. So this was the basic pattern of how we were going to develop. And then I realized that and it was all going to be environmental, responsible, because Ray Anderson was a huge mentor, one of the first U.S. industrialists to put his company on a carbon neutral footprint. That's Interface Carpet. And so through the people he had introduced me to, we knew we had to do that. And we had some of the great leaders and minds of that decade that was coming here.
You understood because of him, and I'm sure others, the role that sustainability, renewable energy played even back then. I mean, everybody understands, not everybody, but most people understand now. But back then, when you were first developing it, they influenced you to, it wasn't because of like climate change. It wasn't even probably because of pollution. What was it? What were the purposes?
It was, Ray read Paul Hawkins' book, and those who know Paul Hawkins, who was really one of the early voices, along with, a handful, talking about, climate change and environment, and that we're using our resources. Ray read Paul's book, and he said, "Oh my God, my company! I'm one of the plunderers of the earth." And how can I do this for tomorrow's unborn child? And so he had a great sense of responsibility, about what he was doing and what he should do. And so that's when he called his executives together and they talked about what they were going to do. And he set his company on a 30-year path, which next year is that 30th year, interestingly enough. And so Ray had been a dear friend for years. And so when I was in the midst of trying to decide what to do, I said, Ray, you know all the smart people. Who do you know that can help me figure out how we're going to save this area? And so he asked the Rocky Mountain Institute to help. And Ray and the Rocky Mountain Institute brought 23 thought leaders here in September of 2000. And so this put us in the forefront of a lot of the thought that, other people weren't thinking about.
It gave them a canvas to paint on.
Well, exactly, because they were all concepts, but no one was in the dirt.
Right,
and so they were thrilled that I would actually was naive enough that I was going to step out and actually do this. Right. And now, luckily, I didn't know any money, and so I was able to fight. And when I ran into agencies that said they were going to shut me down, I said, fine, let's carry this out on the front pages of the newspaper, because I knew I had these professionals behind me that would back me up. And I saw the common sense reality of what we were doing was wrong and that there was a better way to do it.
In conclusion, what is it like to imagine this community years and years ago as you were starting it with all those different obstacles, to have imagined it and now to have seen it all be literally built and filled with human beings raising their families? Most people will never have that feeling. We'd probably all like to have a vision, see a vision come to fruition. You're a visionary as much as anything else, inspiring person in so many ways. Can you describe what it feels like to see this place become what it has become?
Well, 50% of most days, I'm thinking about what needs to happen next. Because we have these 4 pillars that I realized we need to build community around. One is art, one is agriculture, one is health, and one is education. And there's a lot more to be done in each of those areas. I think what we're dealing is we have a health crisis in America today and many places in the world. Mm-hmm. So while we have successes, it feels a lot like a burden also to move forward with some of these things that I see a clear path to, just as clear as we did before. But then if I give someone a tour, it feels so great to really think about what we're doing and as they react. And of course, the greatest reward is those 3 little girls are now women, and they've returned with their northern husbands, and my grandchildren are all being raised right here.
It's amazing. 3 generations living in this community that you visualize, and what you're saying is that it's not done, that the vision is far from done. But to people who come here for the first time, they've seen so much that you've created. Who knows what's next? But what is currently here is good to go in so many ways.
Well, and the real reward is the people that stop me on the street and share how their life has changed. From moving here or for visiting here.
I'm sure everybody has a story.
And then you start realizing, whoa, how the built environment can really change and create hope. And if there's one thing we need, it's hope. That collectively we can tackle some of these challenges. And we need to stop worrying about what someone else is doing if we can't change their actions. But worry more about what we can do and how we can affect other people. And if we all started taking that attitude, I think we'd have a very different place and a very different planet.
Steve Nygren, Serenbe, thank you for playing such an important place in my life and the life of my family. You've become a friend and a mentor, and I so value the time that I get to be with you here or anywhere else. Thank you.
Thank you for using your voice and your platform to share a lot of these concepts. You're a great guy, Pete, and thanks for visiting.
I appreciate that, Phil. That was so much fun for me. I love being in Steve Nygren's presence. I love being at Serenbe, and I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. Definitely check out the Serenbe Stories podcast. If you get down to Atlanta, take some time to visit Serenbe. Tell them Pete Dominic sent you. And take a look at some of the amazing live productions that they put on in the past and are going to be putting on in the future as well. Okay, hard turn now for something really different. Last week, as you may or may not know, Donald Trump went after Greta Thunberg on Twitter, the 16-year-old climate activist who has brought a tremendous amount of attention to the climate crisis. It reminded me, when Trump went after her, of the outrage that his wife, our esteemed First Lady Melania, feigned when his name, her son's name, Barron, was mentioned in the impeachment trial. She said on Twitter, "A minor child deserves privacy and should be kept out of politics. Pamela Karlan, you should be ashamed of your very angry and obviously biased public pandering and using a child to do it." So after Trump was critical of a 16-year-old that most of the world sees as a hero, I quoted Melania's tweet and said, quote, "Your husband is attacking a 16-year-old who is a hero around the world on Twitter and refusing to allow migrant children a flu shot. You live in a hypocrisy every day. You are an empty barrel, and it's very sad. When will we wake up from this nightmare? Hashtag be best." Well, that tweet got a lot of attention and it left the liberal echo chamber and went into the MAGA echo chamber. A lot of Trump supporters pissed at me, going back and forth with me, and I always enjoy that. But a Trump supporter named Brian and I started going at it on Twitter, and I did something that I never thought of. And I asked him if we could talk on the phone. And to my surprise, he was willing to let me call him and record it for this show. And I think you're going to really, I don't know. I have no idea what you're going to think of this, but we went on and on and on. And it's hard because you don't want to argue with your Trump supporter friends and family members. I mean, you want to, but you don't want to damage the relationship. You don't want to create problems. And so you just bury it. So let me do it. Here's my argument, conversation, and surprisingly enlightening talk with Brian, Trump supporter. Okay. All right, man. Anyway, is your son okay?
Yeah, he's fine. Just taking him for his vaccinations and stuff.
Good for you.
Require it.
So you don't have any problem with vaccinations?
No, I don't. I'm not a anti-vaccine person. I love Rob Schneider. I like him politically, but I'm not into the whole not vaccinating my children.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm very glad to hear that. You're also a veteran, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Tell me about your service.
I joined in 2008. I went to Afghanistan in 2010. I returned home November 2011. Finished the rest of my 4 years, and got out 2012 and went to school for 2.5 years, and then I've just been living life since then.
Married?
Divorced. Got divorced right out of the Army.
That sounds awful. Like you came back from your deployment?
Well, there was a lot of things that went wrong. Faithfulness was one of them. And then when I got home, I came home to a alcohol dependent wife, and that was something that I didn't that I didn't. I mean, I didn't have a problem with it. I like to, play Call of Duty and drink at nighttime. When I get off work or something, have a few beers. But it was way more than that with her.
I'm sorry to hear that. Sounds like you are okay with it now.
Yeah, I'm okay with it now. It was good. It was a good thing. It was the best thing I did for my children and me.
How many kids do you have with her?
I have two. I have two boys.
And you were in Afghanistan in 2010 in the Army, or? Yes,
in the Army. Yeah, I was in when we did the when Barack Obama signed the surge, signed off on surge, and I don't remember the exact number, but I know at one point there was well over 100,000 of us, I believe, in Afghanistan at that time.
How do you said that you wanted to talk to me about the Afghan war, about the service, but I'll
talk to you just about anything. I was just reading through your timeline and it piqued my interest because I was watching the news a few days ago, and when it broke that we had been getting lied to about how the Afghanistan war was going worse than what we were being told. And
when you saw that reporting, just to get your perspective on it, when you saw that reporting from the Washington Post, they're calling it the Afghanistan papers, right? Like the Vietnam,
right? Yeah, it was the Washington
Pentagon
Post.
Papers. Did you wait? So your perspective was that they'd been dishonest. Someone had lied to you guys about the campaign and its effectiveness, or do you not do you have any question about the Washington Post's reporting, which is really just, I guess, those papers publishing them?
No, I don't really have any issue with them. You always have a skepticism of government. Me being a Republican and stuff like that, I kind of look at a lot of the things to do with the government with skepticism.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been programs, for example, that have helped, veterans and stuff that they all have their issues, but they all have their benefits too. But getting back to the main thing here is that, when I had watched it on TV when they were breaking the news of the Washington Post, what they printed. And to me, it didn't surprise me because they've done it with just about almost every war, I guess you could say. I guess really the only truthful one was probably during World War II when they said that we were doing real well. But then again, now today you got so much social media, TV, cell phones, everything else like that. You have so much information readily available to you at any time, and it's from all sides of the aisle too. You don't just, I'm not a type of person that just sticks with one. I like to get different opinions and take my own take on it. But with this, I watched a lot of pundits and stuff, and they say that, well, we knew that it was going bad and this, that, and the other. And I personally feel like, I think that what we did there, and I saw it firsthand, and I wanted to, you had did a podcast on it, and I wanted to reach out to you and say, yeah, I'd like to comment on that. What I saw, I lost two friends that were in my platoon. They were killed by a roadside bomb, and they were killed September 23rd, 2011. And it was Sergeant Rafael Big Guy Baez and Carlos, Private First Class Carlos Aparicio. And so I take a lot of the things personally, knowing the young men and being social with them. I take it very personally when somebody lies to me or they tell me that the war is going better than what it really is, because you have emotions and you have blood invested in a place like that, and you want to know that your service and what you did counted for something. And my mind always runs back to doing a patrol in a little small village in Afghanistan, and seeing little girls reading and sounding off of a chalkboard. And they were able to do that because we were patrolling these little villages keeping the Taliban's influence out, because if it was up to the Taliban, those little girls wouldn't be getting an education.
Right.
Or us help them build wells or a soccer field. There was stuff like that when we had a saying, it was win the hearts and minds. And so when the children would run up to us, we were always nice to the children. And because you work with the children, that's how you get your influence for decades to come, is they'll remember the Americans and that we weren't bad. And we just wanted to secure that area and make sure that maybe some of the way we lived in the West, the Western civilization, that some of that would rub off on them, and they wouldn't be so much, because it's a lot of village to village politics there. They don't really care about the government. They don't want government. They just very focused on their village and what's going on there. And they don't like the idea of there being a government above them. And so it really, really upset me when I found out that they felt like what we were doing there wasn't enough, or
right. I understand that. I understand that. And I can fully, I've talked about that for years. I've talked to a lot of men and women who served in Afghanistan. I think I understand the conflict pretty well, the history of the country, our role in it. Obviously I wasn't there like you were. Don't get me wrong, but I've talked about it for hours and hours. I have lots of thoughts, lots of opinions, but I really wanted to get your take on it. And what's really interesting is that I think that you went after me, or however you want to phrase it, on Twitter, and I messaged you. We went back and forth, and you told me that you were at the doctor's with your kid, and it's interesting because you have become a real person to me, not just a face on Twitter. And so I really appreciate you being cool enough to call me. And I don't want to take up a lot of your time. I just want to ask you, I have this experiment in my mind, and I'm trying so hard to be really open-minded about anything that I vehemently disagree with people. But for you specifically, and obviously I barely know you, just know a little bit. You've told me about your ex and the issues there, and your kid, and you sound like you care about your kids a lot, and obviously your service and your what sound like pretty thoughtful emotions and thoughts, and the tragedy in Afghanistan that you experienced. So that's what I know of you now, other than tweets. But my main thrust of my question with you, and a lot of other people who support the president, which it sounds like you do because you're really defending him today, is given what sounds like a thoughtful person, like a normal moral compass, how do you look at Donald Trump and see any redeeming qualities in any way, and without bringing up, any other politician? Because I'm a New Yorker, and I knew, Donald Trump from being in New York. I was actually on The Apprentice. I was pretty familiar with him, and I always put it this way: I didn't care about him. But I was disgusted by him as a man, by the way he talked to and treated women, and just pretty much just all of his actions, and the way that he just always was about himself. So for me to talk to a guy like you, who's thoughtful and educated, I have a hard time understanding what you can see in this man, why you think there's any, the bottom line is a good quality, much less that he cares about you, or frankly, anybody in the military. I can't imagine a less friendly politician to the military ever. But I think, and this is the last thing I'll say and then get your reaction, I think it's usually with people like you and I, maybe, we'll see how you react to it. It's that we're getting different set of information. You don't have the same baseline set of information. I see A, B, and C, and you see D, E, and F, and that's why we're not kind of able to connect. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense. We all live in bubbles in one way or another. And these bubbles are formed with life experiences that we've seen or experienced, and our opinions are what leads us towards how we look at things. And with talking to you, and I'll be honest with you, I saw what you said, and I was like, well, you being upset and having such an issue with him. Who is one that's really affected here? That's not word for word what I tweeted.
No, let me just read what I wrote. I quoted a Melania Trump tweet this morning. And a lot of people have reacted to this, by the way. Her tweet was from early December. Some people probably thought it was recently, but it was from, it was 6 days ago or something. It was the 4th. She wrote, "A minor child deserves privacy and should be kept out of politics. Pamela Karlan, you should be ashamed of your very angry and obviously biased public pandering and using a child to do it." She's referring to this constitutional scholar who said, his son is barren, but he can't be a baron.
Yeah, I saw that.
What I quoted Melania Trump's tweet was, I said, "Your husband is attacking a 16-year-old who is a hero around the world on Twitter and refusing to allow migrant children a flu shot. You live in a hypocrisy every day. You're an empty barrel, and it's sad. When will we wake up from this nightmare?" I don't have your original tweet, which was really annoying because I'd love to go word for word with you and have you say it, right now. But I think I think what you wrote was, if you hate Donald Trump as much as seems, who is really the empty one? It seems maybe a faux moral outrage. That's what you wrote. I think that was the first thing you wrote.
Yes. Okay. And then I believe that's what I tweeted.
Yeah. Okay. So then, we went back and forth.
The reason why I say like a fake moral outrage is because I live in life. We all do things that we regret or have done something stupid, or
sure.
we don't all live. Like I said, I think I even mentioned, like, we didn't elect Jesus to be president. Yeah. And there are us on our side that believe. You may not be religious, but some of us are religious, and some of us see that what God did was choose imperfect men, horrible men, to do good deeds.
Wait, so is it your opinion then, or your belief, I guess, that God chose Donald Trump?
I believe. Well,
like, you believe God chooses everything in life, or something?
I believe we have free will. And I believe that when we make our mistakes, and if we choose to not follow the path that God lays out for us, for example, he presents you opportunities, and if you don't take those opportunities, that's your own fault and the consequences.
What is your religion?
I'm Baptist.
Okay, so that's a pretty I don't know, I don't want to be pejorative. I don't like any religion, but that's a pretty strict Christian religion, I would say. Like, there's a lot of really
a lot of Bible, very Bible study, but I don't attend church regularly. I stopped doing that when I started to realize how much of a clique it was, that if you didn't live in this town for so long and your family wasn't a family that had been there, and you didn't have status, that you really just didn't matter to them.
Really?
And I'm not.
And your church that you felt that way?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
This is Texas. We are Southern in ways that if you're an outsider in some small towns of Texas, that it's hard for you to fit in, and that's like that with You remember in high school, if you moved to a new high school,
I think that's pretty normal. I think that's the situation that I'm in, where we live, because we didn't grow up here. But let's move on, because I want to get back to knowing that you're religious.
Let me go ahead and address what you said, because with you wanting to know how I can morally accept Donald Trump. I had mentioned about the religion thing, and when people say, well, God chose horrible men to do good deeds, I can see from that aspect, and I can look at it from there, and I can justify. There's times when I don't agree with something that he says. Now, for example, I believe in border security, but when you come through, if you're going to come through and you are sitting in a border, like the Border Patrol office, or you're in detention, I don't see why you can't get vaccinated, because that was what one of your tweets was about, because my children just got vaccinated.
Well, I mean, it shouldn't be like, how come that's even like, why are we even if I was completely selfish, which let's say, I don't want anybody to have a spreadable disease. It's not a right. It's my right. It's my right to not let my kid get sick. It's not their right to get that. So I can't, it doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. It would seem that we would all want to not be have our kids next to other kids who have the measles. Like, so give them their shots.
That's a perfect example. Yes, the measles, because that was pretty much eradicated in the early, late 90s, early 2000s. There was hardly any cases of measles. And since the anti-vaccination crowd, we're starting to see that pop back, especially in New York, where you're at.
So I do this thing, and I don't really do it publicly. I try not to do it even on social media because I don't love to generalize. But I do think that people who generally support Donald Trump are one of a few categories. And it sounds like you might be one of the categories, but maybe not some of the others. But either they believe in at least what I define as conspiracy theorists or conspiracy theories.
I'm not like that. No, I don't.
So you believe in climate change?
I don't believe climate change. I believe in, but I don't.
Well, it's not a belief. Like you trust the scientific consensus.
No.
You do not. So that's
the reason. This is why I do that is because when I was younger, I was worried about it, and I thank Al Gore for all of this because I really paid attention to and rented it multiple times from Blockbuster, which is funny.
I recall it. Yes.
And I'd go up to the shelf and I'd pick it up and then my other high school friends, I'd be like, hey, you really got to watch this. This is scary, And then as time went by, 2013 came by, and the polar ice caps are still there, and not what they said, and me having a political ideal on everything. Well, why did Barack Obama just buy a beach house? And there's just there's little things like that. I hear what you're saying, but I don't argue with people about the science. But I would argue with you about the definition of conspiracy theory, and maybe you would disagree. But if all of the scientists agree, then the only two things can be, you gave that anecdotal kind of thing. I haven't seen it, I guess, but I'm not sure why you or I would challenge a climate scientist or an orthopedic surgeon or whoever you took your kid to the doctor today, because they all agree that vaccines work, and they all agree that about the greenhouse effect. And so it is by nature, by definition, a conspiracy theory for you to believe in. It's one of the worst, in my opinion, conspiracy theories that the scientists are, I don't know, a lot of different things that people believe, but you're questioning like all of the scientific consensus in every government, in every college, in every university, in every specialty, and scientific study. And that, by definition, to me, is a conspiracy theory. Why isn't it to you? Well, I don't think you would be very well informed if you don't question everything that you hear.
Did you question the doctor today who pumped a vaccine into your kid? You didn't, because you trusted the doctor.
Actually, I asked him he was getting a meningitis shot today. And I asked him, is this the same thing that I'm seeing on TV about? And then he told me that's the pharmaceutical company trying to get their
shot
mandated in that way. They're constantly going to be getting paid for this vaccination.
Right. Only country in the world that allows pharmaceutical companies to advertise. Just America, and I think New Zealand. But that doesn't mean anything. I'm saying you didn't say, hey, listen, I read something that said this doesn't work or could give my kid autism. You still let him put the shot in the arm. So I'm not saying don't be skeptical or be a good critical thinker. I completely agree with you and I respect you for it. But you and I don't have degrees in science. So neither you or I should be listened to on this or anything that we're not really experts on. That's always what my show was. And is. Don't listen to me. Listen to the people that are on, because that's the problem with the world. Okay, so let me just then move on. We'll move past that. And let me just ask you like one or two more, which is, the next one is, like, I really am seriously interested in how good people can look at Donald Trump and find any redeeming qualities. And you could point to almost any other politician, Republican or Democrat. You could point to celebrities and people in my life who I really don't like, and I'll still find something about them. What is it? Do you find anything respectable, redeeming character quality about this man who's let me just give you just a quick litany. But personally, he's ruined all 3 marriages, including his current one, where he had affairs while his wife either had just given birth or was pregnant with a porn star. He cheated on the other ones. Which is fine. I mean, it sounds like you had some infidelity in your marriage. It happens. But when you add that up to many marriages, when it has, and when you don't pay people for the work they do, which he so often didn't pay people for the work that they did. And he was notorious for that in New York. And then finally, when he doesn't seem to be, he's so mean. He's preposterously cruel to people. And I think, like, I could hate you and all of your views, but I would never be cruel to you, man. Like, I wouldn't, certainly not to your face, much less even really on Twitter. Like that, right. How do you look, what redeeming qualities do you find based on the kind of the case, the arguments that I just made? Okay.
Well, a lot of this stuff came to light during the run up for the presidency. And, and I was seeing these things, and these things were being reported. And some of them would make me stop and say, whoa, I remember when I was originally, Ted Cruz was who I was wanting to be president. And I remember thinking of, gosh, all this stuff coming out about Donald Trump, is a lot of this true? And then doing some research and stuff like that, reading articles and it not just opinion articles, but, just stuff that had been wrote about him throughout the 80s and the early 90s. Then I started stumbling onto some things that weren't widely reported. For example, there was a squatter in Trump Tower, and she was an African American, and she was in one of the apartments or homes that was in Trump Tower, and it came time for her to leave, and she refused to leave. And Donald Trump was made aware of this, and he said, basically, he paid for this woman to have 3 square meals a day. He paid for the apartment, and he let her live there rent free. And she recorded like a video on, it was some social media platform, but yeah. She ran it, and she said, Donald Trump.
A homeless black woman reveals that she's been living in Trump Tower for 8 years with the blessings of Donald Trump. Filming from a hotel window, the woman says she originally snuck in the building before becoming a squatter and wanted empty rooms. This it? I found it. Definitely. Okay, so I'm telling you, that's not a true story. Okay. It didn't happen. And feel free to challenge me. I'll send you the link. But we've been so littered with false story. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, we're just talking for the first time, but like, do you think Alex? That's an InfoWars story. Alex Jones. Are you familiar with him? He's from down there.
I don't mess with InfoWars. That's not my cup of tea.
Good. I'm glad to hear. But that's his story, the one that you just shared me. And maybe it came from other places too. But from my quick search, it's InfoWars published a video purportedly showing a former homeless woman at Trump Tower. My skill, if I have anything, man, is finding things on the internet quick and being able to prove, not always, but that's what I do. I'm kind of like a journalist that way. And so that's how I was able to find that let's okay, so that one's not true, but even if it were true,
well, we'll move on to, let's see, was it Maury? I believe it was a Maury Povich show that he was doing, and a girl was on there, and they surprised her with a check from Donald Trump, and Donald Trump did a little snippet video saying hello to the little girl, and basically saying that he was giving this donation to her and for her to get better. And then I believe that also Donald Trump helped a young boy with his father's kidney transplant, I believe it was, to be able to afford it. No, it might have been a liver, but I think it might have been a kidney. But he donated the money because the little boy had wrote him letters. But there's many other.
But I'm going to guess those things are probably false too. I am, and I'm not going to look them up right now. I will later and get back to you, or maybe you can send me them if you find them. But let's just put aside the things that I think, the things that are purported that he did, the generous things, And look what he has done. And let's only look at your community, the veteran community.
I don't think that that's not. I don't think that that's false, because they actually have the episode where he's donating this money for this girl.
But he is often the difference there is that Donald Trump knows how to sell something. So he went on Maury Povich. He held up a check, but then we have to follow up to see whether or not he gave it to her. But more importantly, that's not generous at all. It's not generous at all, in my opinion, to go publicly. I don't know about you, but do you go around telling everybody the good deeds that you do? Does your religion inform that you should publicize your good deeds? Because he's about publicity. He only did that because it was on TV, and it works for him. He got something out of that. Altruism and generosity, and I thought Christianity and all religions teach us to do things because they're the right thing to do, not, and it makes you feel good, but not so that other people know and think you're a good person. But forget it all. When you see him today, this issue between you and I started because I was so, offended that the most powerful man in the world would attack a minor. I have a principle that if you're a young person, we all do stupid things. You already said that. You should not be attacked by anybody, which is why we have laws where even if you commit a heinous crime, if you're under 18, they cannot report your name. They have to blur your face because they give you this kind of benefit of the doubt. For the President of the United States to do this to this young woman, whether or not you think that she's right or wrong or she thrust herself in the public atmosphere, for the President of the United States to do that, not only to her, but to so many other people who you and I might agree are awful people. But when you're the president, you lead and you don't insult people and you don't treat people poorly. He is the meanest and cruelest person, not only, this is my opinion, that I've ever known. He is so mean and cruel on an everyday basis to everybody almost that he sees and work. And how do you not agree with that, I guess? It sounds like you don't agree with that he's a mean and cruel, horrible person with no sense of morality or dignity or integrity or care for anybody, including his own children and wives. How come you don't what?
I severely just disagree with that. I can't. I don't. He's not the devil incarnate or not.
No, I don't believe in that religion stuff. So I'm just saying, just as a human on earth, what is it that...
I don't believe he's as bad as everybody thinks it is.
Why is it not bad for a person? I'm sorry to keep interrupting you. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Why is it not bad for a person to call other people names? Or I thought we, a conservative and liberal or anybody, all taught our kids, don't call people names.
Well, we're not supposed to, but we do anyways.
Yeah, we do. But we agree that you shouldn't, that you don't want your kid to go bully another kid. Do you agree with that, or do you?
No, I was just telling my son today. The nurse asked, did he have bullies at school? And I said, well, you wouldn't agree with how I decided to deal with bullies.
No, well, that's different. I didn't ask you how you deal with bullies. I'm saying if your son was the bully.
No, but what I'm saying is that we don't like bullies, right? Well, I was taught how to deal with a bully maybe differently than you are. And, I see the things that Donald Trump does, and hey, he's rude, he's brash, he boasts about a lot of stuff. He exaggerates. I understand that. I knew that when I voted for him. Some of it's funny. I like it when, if you've ever seen, y'all probably watch one of his rallies and see the most hateful Hitlerian man on the planet. I watch it. I think it's funny because he pokes and presses at the press all the time. And I think a lot of us understand that when we
but those people are my friends, man, and they get threatened all the time with their lives. But that's because of him. Don't you think it's when
I don't know any conservatives that I associate with or anything that threaten physical violence on anybody.
It doesn't matter, but that's not fair, man. That's not fair that you don't know anybody. That's good. I hope that you don't. I'm telling you, and you have to concede, my friends who are journalists who work at any number of different outlets, they have all kinds of security issues. They get all kinds of threats. And it's because he name checks them. He calls them by their name and says, basically, he doxes them. He says, this is where they work. They're scum. If you believe that and you're kind of unhinged, then, they're all being targeted. They're getting threats all the time. Do you not believe that they're getting threats? I'm telling you that. Do you not see it? Do you not see?
Most assuredly they're getting threats. You look at the wacko that was sending bombs to the different.
He was a huge Trump supporter.
I saw the van. I saw the picture of the van.
Yeah, but there's a lot. I'm not saying that you or anybody else is threatening him. I'm sure most people that like Donald Trump aren't threatening journalists, but that doesn't disprove the fact that journalists are being threatened.
No, I'm not trying to prove that one way or the other. I believe that journalists.
So why is that not morally offensive to you?
Well, it could be morally offensive, but is it going to change anything? No. I mean, that's just what I'm saying is
no, but a president of
I have a different. Oh, let me bring it to you in this aspect. Maybe this will help you understand our side or the MAGA movement. Or I have a different way of looking at things because I'm very glad to be back home, alive and in mostly one piece, and. There is things about when I look at politics, people throw fits over the smallest things. They get all upset and they just get really outraged, really angry so fast, so quick. And then you got the next news cycle. And then when you see everybody's upset, so angry about everything all the time, you look at it and it's fake news. Oh, that's just they're just morally outraged. This is fake. It doesn't matter why they're upset because it's really not important at the end of the day. That I kind of have that mindset where it's not really like it's morally repugnant. Okay, he called somebody a name. He made fun of somebody.
And then they got threatened.
And they got, and then they get threatened. I get it.
But no other president anywhere in the world behaves in such a way. It is a complete like you're supposed to leadership. I mean, if you believe that Jesus Christ is your savior, how do you not also believe in that you don't have to, that you not turning the other cheek, especially when you're a leader, and someone insults you, you don't insult them back. You stay above it. You lead. And for him to not only insult people, but target people, putting them in danger. How do you square that? It's not conservative. It's not liberal. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's horrible for any leader anywhere in the world to do that. How do you not agree with that? That's a horrible behavior. It's awful role modeling for our children. It's dangerous and puts people in tremendous danger. Like, why don't you have a huge problem with that alone to the point that it would sink your support for him, that he threatens journalists who are just doing journalism, even if they disagree with him, even if they're critical of him?
Well, there are a lot of them that are critical of him.
But that's every president. Every president has had tons of journalists be critical. None of them have ever threatened them. Yes,
I understand. Barack Obama had his problems with different journalists.
He never ever threatened a journalist never mentioned them by name. Neither did George W. Bush. Neither did Nixon. No one. And forget about it. The only people who do that are the kind of, I thought, the leaders that we all agreed were terrible, like Putin and Kim Jong-un and the people that you were fighting, by the way. Like, that's their behavior.
I just don't look at it the same way you do. I mean, that's why we go to the different sides that we go to. Is like a boxing match. You know what I'm saying? Like when the bell's over, you go to your corner, and then when you ring the bell, we go right back at it again because we're so determined on our views that, it's hard to reach across and
just so you know, I'm going to jump and I'm going to call you back and maybe we'll just keep doing this and be friends and maybe I'll publish it and maybe I won't. But let me just clear something up. Like, I don't want to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong, man. I honest to God want to understand why you and I don't agree that punching a baby in the face is a bad idea.
Well, of course, that's a bad idea. I know,
but that's I brought it all the way down to something I knew you would say, of course, like, killing and eating a cat is a bad idea. Like, at some point, though, you and I disagree on behavior. And I tend to think, honestly, that it's kind of a cult thing where you would hate it if I did this to you. You would hate it if anybody else did this to you. But something about Donald Trump makes you suspend your normal morals for him.
Okay, well, I'll take you to this point.
I got to get my daughter to dance. So your last point.
Okay, all right. I'll make it real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Does he not get threatened every day?
Every president does. Every president does.
Okay, yes, but this is unprecedented for this president.
No, it's not, Mike. No, it's not. You don't think Barack Obama had more threats than any other president.
You don't think that the Secret Service has to work extra hard just for Donald Trump?
No, I don't think they have to work harder than they did for Obama. And my cousin is in the Secret Service, lives in Texas, and so I know it for a fact. I mean, there are records, you can chart this stuff. But even if it were wrong, what's the point? That if he gets threatened more than Obama, which is not true, but even if it were, and I've already conceded that, what's your point?
True. Well, I said it's unprecedented, the threats that he gets, yes, but the point that I'm getting stumbled here, because you made a good point. No, I'm just joking. But
no problem.
They said that with his presidency, he's destroying our democracy. He's doing this and he's doing that, and they talk so bad about him all the time. There's going to be, just like you're explaining about journalists, that they themselves are going to get threatened or attacked. The same thing can happen to Donald Trump with all the negativity and everybody making him seem like he's the most evil person.
But there's a difference between a president and a journalist. I'm saying journalists get threats because of Trump. And you're saying Trump gets threats, and I'm not sure why.
Because of journalists, yes.
No, not because of journalists. Journalists aren't the reason.
Supposed to be, well, okay. With the fact that they are doing their job, is what is making them get threats. The fact that Donald Trump is doing his job and the other side doesn't like it, he gets threats. All right. I know you got to get your daughter to.
I appreciate, dude, your time. I appreciate your thoughts. I want to keep maybe talking with you, and we can.
It'll help the podcast out. It's not my sympathy, but I'll help you out, and we'll discuss more later on if everything turns out right.
I hope you appreciate my intentions and my respect.
Yes, I do.
And I would love to talk to you more specifically about your service.
If I can help. Maybe y'all understand where we come from and why we like him. Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to figure out and I don't think everybody's the same. But
I just think he just doesn't put up with a lot of bullshit, and I think that's a very good quality, I guess, in my opinion.
Okay,
but he's very loud and boisterous about it, and that offends lots and lots of people. So,
all right, man. Brian, right? Bryn.
Yes.
I'll be in touch, and you got my number, you got my DM, so
okay.
Feel free to reach out, and I'll let you know if I'm going to publish this. I'll let you know before I do, and if there's anything that for any reason, like identifying characteristics or anything else, I'd be happy to take it out.
Okay,
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Right. Peace.
Bye.